All right, so I'm Matt. I'm from the club. You may have seen me from such activities as trying to climb up stupid cliffs and trying to jump off cliffs attached to ropes. I quite find this fun. I also like mushrooms. So basically, what a mushroom is it's just the fruiting body of the mycelium, which is this kind of network of roots that goes all the way through the ground. So if you look at this picture here, this is just like the orange of the fruit. And the mycelium is this kind of network that comes off the bottom here. So realistically, as long as we care, we're just picking off the like little spore distribution stuff that we have off the mushroom. We're not actually damaging the body of the mushroom itself. So they're like not animals and not plants, but they are like a pretty essential part of the ecosystem. They break down dead matter, they recycle nutrients, super useful, and they're like a basis of a lot of the food chain things. So there's a couple key things to identify a mushroom. The first is the cap. So that's this thing here. And then we have the spore surface, which is this in here. And we also have the stem. It's also called a stipe. So that's the general basics of a mushroom. If you want to identify them, though, you need to know the terminology and what you're trying to describe. So the first thing to look at is the cap shape for the mushroom when you're trying to identify it. So you want to have a look at the shape. So there's a whole bunch of different shapes, and this is not a conclusive summary of all the different shapes, but you can have like a kind of hemispherical. You can have a convex kind of shaped mushroom. You can have what's called a umpennate mushroom. So that's like one with a little nipple in the middle. You can also have a parabolic. So a lot of your little tiny mushrooms have this kind of parabolic shape or a conical shape. And then you can have it's called a umbonate. So that's a kind of like a little, I don't know, reverse nipple. And finally, there's the kind of weird one, which is hard to express in 2D, but this is a funnel shape. So if we imagine this is the inside, that's a funnel shaped mushroom. So that's the general cap. The other things you have to be aware of are color, which can be anything really, the surface, and the margin. So the surface can often mean that there are different objects. There could be like remnants of a veil which have been left on the side. Veil would be when the mushroom's first kind of emerging out, it's covered in a thin membrane. And as the mushroom grows and expands, it leaves behind traces of this membrane across the whole thing. So the surface might have these white dots. So if we kind of have a look at our example up here, these little white dots up here are veil remnants. So you can use that to identify the mushrooms. So certain mushrooms have them, certain mushrooms don't. And then finally, you also want to look at the margin. So that means like if you have a look at this, the margin could be, have all these inky drops on the sides, or you could have just little frills, or it could just be perfectly smooth. So these are kind of things you need to be aware of when you're trying to identify the mushroom. For the cap, so the other things that are important are the spore surface. So if we go down here and we look at spore surface. So the spore surface is kind of these gills underneath the mushroom. So there's a couple different ways they go. So if we have a look at one here, we have gills, and the gills are really obvious. They're the classic kind of mushroom thing. There's also not gills, but pores. So that'll be like a whole collection of little tiny dots all the way through the bases of the mushroom. And then finally, one that you probably relatively common to see it's called ridges. So is it ridges? Yeah. So ridges, stuff like if you've seen morels or you've seen kind of these weird looking fungi, but they're not gills because they don't run to the center completely. They're not like a full length. If you have a look at those, that's a rough estimation. I'll show you some pictures later to demonstrate. And so much like the caps, pores have different shapes. So the way they attach to the stem or stipe is important to identify. So if we have a look at, we'll just call this our basic mushroom. So you can have gills or pores that don't attach to the stem. These are called free. You can have ones that only just attach to the stem. These are called adnexed. Let's spell that properly. Adnexed. All right, and you can also have a bit of a mushroom here in our stem, and if they like firmly attach to the stem, that is adennate. And then finally, if we have our mushroom here, and it just runs down the length of the stem, this is called a decurrent. Decurrent gills or pores. So that's the kind of language you kind of really need to be using in order to identify your mushrooms, if you can kind of have this done. So the other thing that's worth noting for spore surface is that you can have a look at these rings. So this stem or stipe, you see this little surface here, that's another remnant of the veil that's left around the basis of the ring. So the mushroom might have this ring, or it's also called an annulus around it. So some mushrooms do, some mushrooms don't. If you look at the example that we have up here, which is of a Amanita muscara, also known as a fly agaric, it's like the classic red mushroom that often has this annulus around it, which is an identifying feature for it. And then finally, the kind of last thing you really need to know to identify a mushroom is your stem. Excuse my spelling and writing and everything. It's a bit, how you going? So with the stem, you need to have a knowledge of the shape. So it'll define whether it's a little thin mushroom, or you've got a real big fat mushroom, or maybe you've got a wiggly mushroom, or maybe you have a mushroom that's growing out like that. So the shape of the stem is important. What's also important is the interior. So that means if you cut open the mushroom, you want to have a look inside and see if it's hollow, or maybe it's just got a mess of junk in there, or maybe it's kind of like a halfway between hollow with a spongy surface or nothing else inside it. And you also need to look at the ring or annulus there. All right, so that's the kind of the basics of identifying mushrooms: the shape, spore surface, gills, pores, whatever else, and the stem. But there's a couple of extra things as well. So if you really need to know what mushroom it is, you want to also look at the spore print. And the spore print is basically where you just cut the head off the mushroom, place it over a bit of white or black paper, and from the gills, from the spore surface, the spores are going to fall out, and they're a unique pattern and color. And sometimes like the microscopic analysis of it is what's going to tell you what kind of mushroom it is. So let me go over, let me switch to my summary. 1 second, guys, screen share. Okay. All right, so your summary really is you got to look at the cap, you got to look at the color, shape, and texture. The stem is the size, what's on the inside, and whether it's got a ring or an annulus. The gills, you got to look at the type, whether it's gills, pores. There's a couple other ones as well. You can have like little tiny teeth and things, but be aware. And then you also got to look at flesh. So when you cut your mushroom open, the color of the flesh on the inside is really important. And a lot of mushrooms have like a liquid that weeps out of them. This is a really defining characteristic, especially of the mushrooms we're going to be looking for, which is where if you cut them open, they're going to start bleeding this orange substance. And bruising is also a really key point. So with saffron milk caps, they're going to bruise green. Whereas if you're the kind of person that's looking for psilocybin mushrooms, they're almost uniformly, they bruise blue. So the bruising color is super indicative of what species it is. You also need to have a look at the substrate on the mushroom that it's growing from. So if you find something that looks like a saffron milk cap, but it's growing in the middle of a cow field out of a bit of dung, maybe it's not a saffron milk cap because they only grow in pine forests. If you see something growing out of a fallen tree, it's a nice kind of round fan-looking mushroom, it could be a turkey tail. So have a look at the substrate that it's growing out of and the size as well. Like you can find little tiny things that look similar to saffron milk caps, but if not the right size, don't even deal with it. So also environment is important. You want to look at the weather, what situation you're in. Are you in a pine forest? You're up in the mountains. Smell. The book that I use also has taste, which is questionable at best. I mean, probably don't want to be tasting your mushrooms, maybe if you get super into it. And like time of year too. So a lot of mushrooms are only in this autumn period or a real wet spring, keep in mind. And then also spore prints, DNA tests. All right, so there's kind of, these are the core groups of fungus that you can find around here, or in the world really. There's jelly fungus. So this is like the oldest kind of fungus that evolved, and it's found everywhere. It's super gross looking. A few of them are quite edible. You can kind of boil them and blanch them, but have knowledge of that before you do it. Polypore mushrooms. So these are the turkey tails I mentioned before. They're going to stick out the side of the trees, or they'll come off dead wood. They uniformly come off wood. So they're kind of digesting these trees as they're doing it. So they're really interesting. They can be good fire starters as well if you're into that kind of stuff. Coral fungus, I think these ones just look cool as hell. To my knowledge, there's not a huge amount of edible coral fungus, but they make great photos. So, you know, bring a camera, bring a macro lens. Agarics. So agarics are like your classic fungus. These are the kind of the mushrooms with the gills. Fly agarics, I think, yeah, Amanita muscara and fly agaric is like the classic red mushroom with white dots on top. Poisonous, you can trip off it, but tripping off it is only because your body is shutting down. So don't do that. You will kill yourself. And there's a ton of these all around. There's 100 different species. It's super important to know what you're looking for because there are a lot of species that look edible that aren't, and there are a lot of species that look like edible plants in Europe that are not edible plants over here. So just be careful. Bullets. So these are pored fungus. So if you have a look at the little tiny pores in the middle there, excuse me, that's kind of the sign of a bullet fungus. There's a whole ton of edible ones of these as well. Slippery jacks is the kind of the go-to pored fungus that you're going to be looking for in Australia. You have stinkhorns. This is a stinkhorn that I found yesterday. They look like sarlaccs and like terrifying nightmare creatures. I recommend having a look at them, cut them off. They're weird looking. They smell. I don't think they're edible, but you know, they're good fun. And then you have, I'm going to fuck this one up, askemotites. So these are truffles and morels and things. So they're called the askemotites because what they're doing is they launch spores out of them, which is interesting. There are a lot of, you know, edible ones of these. I'm not an expert in these by any measure. I understand you need to have a truffle dog or a truffle pig to find them. So who knows, man? But if you're into that kind of stuff and want to learn more, that's where you want to start researching. All right, so collecting fungi. So when you're collecting fungus, don't just, you know, YOLO it and just rip it out of the ground. You want to delicately cut off the mushroom through the stem by reaching underneath and sliding a knife in and just gently sawing through it. This means that you're not damaging the mycelium, which is the actual body of the mushroom. You're just taking the fruit. So you're just picking the apple off the plant and not destroying the thing that actually makes it happen. Be mindful of the environment. I mean, come on, you guys are all part of the Outdoor Adventure Club. You realize that, you know, you don't want to be stomping through and, you know, breaking trees and just messing stuff up. Be careful. Never ever eat a mushroom that you're not 100% sure of the identification of. If you have a look at something and you think, oh yeah, that looks relatively similar to a saffron milk cap, put it away. unless you look at it and you go, have the list of features, and you go, yeah, it's got this, it's got this, it's got this, it's got this. It's a saffron milk cap, then you eat it. Always, don't just get a whole pile of saffrons and then you go, yeah, have a look at every single one, identify it correctly, and then you can eat it. The other thing is, when I was taught, it was to use a wicker basket and then place your mushrooms gills down so that as you're carrying them through the forest, the spores are still dropping out. So you still let the mushroom function as it's supposed to be, and you're kind of still letting it be part of that natural cycle. So, I'm not sure if it's the best way to do it, but, it seems ethical. All right, so identifying saffron milk caps. So saffron milk caps are really delicious. We were having a discussion before as to whether saffrons or slippery jacks are the best. I kind of prefer saffrons as long as you get the little tiny ones. So if you have a look at this picture on the right, this is ones that I found yesterday. There's a whole kind of range of shapes and things, and there's a stinkhorn in the middle. Yeah, so you can see it's got a nice hollow stem. We'll go from the beginning. So basically you want from like 3 to 8 centimeters. It's got this pinkish to pale orange or apricot color with concentric rings of color around the outside. So I have one here, and I'll show you some real ones in a second. So basically there's like little white rings of color in it, and it's a convex shape which kind of becomes a shallow funnel as it's growing. It's got a kind of pale yellow flesh that bleeds this real sticky orange latex. So that's a real indicative feature. So if it doesn't have that, then it's definitely not a saffron. So it's got gills that adonate to subdecurrent. So you kind of see how it connects to the stem, and they're a kind of pinkish color. And if you give them a good flick with your finger, they'll turn this kind of real nice green color, which makes them look significantly less appealing. Nice thick stem, cylindrical and hollow. All right, now I'm gonna swap to my other camera for a second. Okay. All right, spotlight video. Okay, so you can see me now. So this is the kind of ideal saffron milk cap. So you can kind of see these rings of discoloration on it. As it's a young one, you're not really seeing much. And then you've got your adonated to decurrent. One second, sorry, it's quite hard. Yeah, adonated to decurrent gills that run to the stem, so you can see how it connects. And if I give this one a flick, it's going to turn a nice green color. And you can see how the stem is hollow and it's got nice white flesh. And so this is a really nice, pretty looking one. This one will be quite tasty. Don't focus on me, it's on the mushroom. Yeah, okay, quite nice. And this is also a fucking saffron milk cap. It's hideous and disgusting looking. It's probably still edible, but like, do you want to eat it? Probably not, because there's tons of these. So you can kind of see that green, bluish discoloration on the gills. And so not all mushrooms are going to look exactly the same. They've got a broad range of ways that they present. So you can kind of see this one hasn't grown evenly. It's probably been cramped when it was growing. So it's got this kind of deformity here, and that's kind of spread out, and it's, done its thing. Right, so that is a saffron milk cap in real life. If you've got any questions about that one, now's the time. Otherwise, I'll move on to the next edible mushroom.
You want to show everyone on the disgusting one the orange latex? Because it's...
yeah, sure. One second, let me just grab a knife. All right, so I'm gonna just give it a... All right, so that is the... My color balance isn't ideal here. So you can kind of see that bleeding orange color. As I leave this for longer, this is going to start actually seeping out orange. And if I rub my finger on it or something, yeah, you see, it's not an immediate thing; it's a gradually over time thing. But yeah, maybe because it's a little bit old, it's not coming straight away. but I'll leave this and we'll get back to it and see if it pops out. Got bloody mushroom all over my drawing tablet. All right, and now if we go back to this presentation. Okay. So the next one is slippery jacks. Slippery jacks are a little bit smaller than saffron milkcaps, and they've kind of got this light brown ochre color. So they're convex to a plane, so they're just your standard mushroomy shape. If you ever played Minecraft, what Minecraft told you mushrooms look like is what these look like. They have this kind of weird smooth surface with a slippery or sticky feel to it, depending on how dry it's been. The flesh is quite white with a yellow tint, and the pores are bright yellow to this kind of old gold color. And that stem is fully enclosed. There's no hollow section to it, yellowish and smooth. With finding both this and the saffron milkcap, they often pop up out of nowhere. So you'll just be looking at these pine forests and you'll see these little mounds, like probably 9 times out of 10, underneath that mound is a saffron milkcap. You just need to kick it around. So even if you look around, you see no mushrooms immediately. If you look a little closer, you'll realize that you're standing in a giant field full of them. Yeah, that's all I have prepared. So if you got any questions, that's pretty obvious. If you want to cook mushrooms with saffron milkcaps and slippery jacks, the best way I've found is to take them and cook them up in a ton of butter and garlic and oil. So if you fry them up that way, and then once you've fried them, you can freeze them and reuse them in pastas or risottos or things. Slippery jacks, you can also cut them up finely, and they are amazing in like a Chinese style dumpling. And when you're looking for them, like have fun, like go to pine forest. Sorry, did I mention that slippery jacks? Saffron milkcaps only occur in pine forests? Because that's probably the key point. So New South Wales has tons of state forests, and all these state forests are huge plantations of pine trees. So if you go for a walk during the right season, which is basically just after it gets cold at the start of autumn, so generally once it drops down to around 21 degrees and starts raining for about 2 or 3 days consistently, then these mushrooms start to appear, and they'll appear all the way up until it starts to get real cold. So if you go out now, there's still some out there. Belangolo's full of them, Oberon's full of them. But as it starts to get colder and colder into the depths of winter, you're going to have a harder time finding nice looking small fresh mushrooms. Yeah, I think that's it. Any questions, any comments, any experiences?
Hey, Matt. I've got 2 questions. But first, thanks for the presentation today. It's very informative.
No problem.
So the first question I had was, is there any way to tell if a mushroom is ready to be picked in that it's not sort of still coming up, or if the mushroom's sort of on its way out? Like, is there a perfect stage to pick it?
So if you saw that little cute mushroom that I showed you before, the good looking one, I'd say like that was quite a young mushroom. But I find that they taste a lot better when they're like not old and battered. So too young means you won't be able to see it, because these things, they'll go from nothing to something that size overnight. If it's still covered with a veil, then it's probably not ideal. But up to that point, like once you see them, they're good to eat, you know?
Okay.
And if you're desperate for them, you can eat the big ones and just use enough butter and garlic, and they'll taste like butter and garlic. But try getting the smaller ones, and you have a better flavor and a better experience, I think.
Okay. And my other question was, if you want to go out to look for some, would you just go for a bushwalk and then just sort of take a left and then just walk through the bushes sort of thing, or?
So if you're looking for these ones, they're only found in pine forests because they have a symbiotic relationship with the roots of the pine trees. So the mycelium spreads out across the entire forest, and then these pop up in the right seasons. So basically, go to Belangolo, and I reckon if you spend 10 meters walking like in off the road, you'll see like at least one of them.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. Anything else? Anyone else got any questions about other kinds of mushrooms or good locations or anything else.
Are there any particularly lethal mushrooms that you need to stay away from?
Yes. So
Or like
the Amanita
platforms?
muscara. Yeah.
That
So
one.
we Amanita muscara is the one that people have used it for shamanistic rituals and things, but it's definitely poisonous. So just don't try it. It's not a big brain move. A lot of people have also. The good thing is in Australia we don't have the death caps which Europe has. So we have a lot of mushrooms, but a lot of the mushrooms that we have just don't have that 3,000 years worth of cultural information built up. People in Europe and Asia have been eating mushrooms and dying for 3,000 years. So we haven't had that kind of history lesson in Australia. We just have a couple that are edible, and a lot of them are just like, well, this looks like this, and we can identify it, but everything else is like, work it out on yourself. So we don't have a huge amount of poisonous mushrooms, but only because people aren't eating every mushroom they come across.
And a good thing to know, I think a lot of the ones that we are eating, like the milk caps and the slippery jacks, they're all introduced because of the pine trees.
Yep.
So actually it would be a good thing to note if there is any. Have you found anything for native mushrooms that we can eat, Matt, or you haven't come across anything like that?
I have a book and I've been reading through it, and there's just not a huge amount of data because it wasn't a traditional part of the Aboriginal kind of lifestyle and things, and so we don't really know. But you could be the first. You could find these delicious mushrooms. Just get amongst it.
I'll just take pictures. So the only ones I feel comfortable picking are the ones in the pine forest, like the milk caps and the slippery jacks.
Yeah. The other good thing is if you take photos, there's a couple Facebook groups, Mushroom Pickers Australia and things. They're kind of private groups. But if you join them, they'll share with you like information. So if you find a mushroom that you want to identify, this is like the best way to do it. You take a really nice photo of it, you describe it using the kind of lexicon that you now have, and then you post it on these Facebook groups. There's generally someone that's going to be able to like log on and say, oh, hey, this is a Lactaris delicious saffron milk cap, definitively. Or they'll say, hey, look, we need to get better photos, cut it in half, let me have a look at the inside of it. So if you're kind of into that kind of stuff, it's a good community to get a part of, and they'll tell you when the mushrooms start next season, but they sure as hell won't tell you where because everyone is viciously protective of all their secret stockpiles of mushrooms.
Matt, can I ask you, this may be a little bit technical, but I came across something that looked like a slippery jack, and but it was kind of, instead of being dark brown, it was light yellow. It was yellow brown, and it had a thinner stem. So I had a look online to see the difference, and one said that it could be a slippery gill. There's something called a slippery gill, as compared to a slippery jack. So the slippery jacks they were talking about, so in your photo with the red mushroom, you know how you've got the stem? They say that slippery jacks have this kind of skirt. So in the middle of the stem, if you can see, there's this little skirt.
Yep.
Whereas, so it's another type of bolete mushroom. So luckily, I mean, I still ate it because they were saying that all boletes are pretty much edible. So
did it have a spicy flavor to it? Because it could be a pepper jack. There's a mushroom that looks very similar, but it's like a whiter color. And it's meant to taste almost chili-like.
No, I can't tell the difference because I just put it all together with the others.
Okay.
And then we stir-fried it with chili, so it was all spicy.
Cilius granulatus, maybe?
Yeah, so Cilius granulatus. I think I had a look at that and looked very similar to that. And it was said it was edible. So that particular one didn't have a skirt and the stem looked thinner.
Yeah, yep, that's kind of seems to be, and it was coming out of fallen pine needles and things?
Yep, it was all in the same area. of the slippery jacks. So once you find like a mound, because they're quite hidden under all the pine needles, so you have to look around the base of the trees, and then you see these kind of little hills or these little mounds, and then you kind of bend down and you kind of move away the pine needles. Once you find one, you know you'll find a clump of them all around each other.
So the author's notes for my field guide says that the author has eaten this species and its flavor is excellent, although its texture is soft and may not be to everyone's liking. The gelatinous cap peels readily and should be discarded before eating. So that sounds exactly like you're talking about.
This is the granulatus or the luteus?
That's the granulatus.
Okay, cool. It's probably
Yeah,
similar in flavor.
Yeah, so I have a field guide to fungi of Australia by A.M. Young, which I thoroughly recommend. It's got really good illustrations and excellent descriptions. There's 2 or 3 other really well-regarded books that I recommend you have a look at. You're welcome to borrow this or ask me to photocopy pages for any of you guys if you want to know more about different kind of mushrooms.
Bring you?
Yeah, or bring me, you know. I'm happy to go for a hike, really. I'm a hard man to convince to go outdoors.
Matt, would you mind taking a copy of the page of the slippery jack and the milk caps and send them up to us? And at least then we have that and we can use that as our reference.
Sure thing. Okay, so hopefully.
I'm bummed I missed out on your trip. That one time you took the club out.
That's right. We'll run another one when it's not miserable.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks everyone for your time. I'll send you out some pictures and things. If you find any cool mushrooms, take photos and send them to me. It's always fun. And don't eat anything you're not sure what it is.